My name is Angelina Avedano, and this is Interspace, where we explore the spaces between us. Join me for discussions on a series of realities with thinkers, writers, thought leaders, and artists. Thom Carr has been practicing yoga since 1974 and has been teaching since 1986. He completed instruction in several Raja Yoga traditions, including Transcendental Meditation, Kriya Yoga, and Ananda Yoga. Thom is also a Jo-Ray practitioner, Reiki master, and teacher, and has a bachelor's degree in psychology. He continues to study various traditions of yoga, spiritual traditions, and energy work. Thom currently works with his most dedicated students, coupling Western and Eastern modalities into his lessons. Please welcome Thom Carr. Hi, Thom. Thanks for coming back to talk to me today.
Sure, anytime.
Last time we spoke, we talked about meditation, and this time I really wanted to have a conversation with you as we are beginning the new year, and we're leaving 2020 and heading into 2021. I wanted to talk about duality and ask you to maybe help unpack the importance of duality, the illusion of duality, and yet the relevance that we live in it all the time. And maybe we could have that conversation today. What do you think about duality?
Sure. That's, I think, of primary importance in many ways of just living here. Duality and multiplicity that kind of comes from duality is how we live our lives. As a matter of fact, it's how we can distinguish one thing from another in the first place. How do we know about dark unless there's light, day or night, or any kind of opposites that you want to come across? It's the idea that we exclusively give certain characteristics in our minds to one thing, and another thing has apparent opposite characteristics in our minds when we run across it. We experience, for example, something pleasurable or something unpleasant, and those are opposites, immediately setting up a situation of duality. This seems to be just spontaneous, like it's the way things are. We don't have to make it that way consciously. But is it that way? It's the apparent experience of the way life goes that we have one thing and its opposite, or something like its opposite, all the time. That's always present. We have, even within ourselves, ideas or thoughts, attitudes, and so on that we like and ones that we don't like all the time. So life, in the waking state at least, seems to always be presented to us as a series of opposites or duality. And we always seem to have the urge to make a choice between those two things. Obviously, usually we would pick something that's pleasurable to us over something that's not, something that we like over something that we dislike. And I think we have to sit back and take a look. Instead of giving this kind of meaning to external life, isn't it us that's making it dualistic?
Well, one thing I want to say, though, about that, I think part of this is just biology, right? Because even organisms, early, primitive organisms will move away from something that is unpleasant and move towards something that is, it's okay, good for them, nurturing for them.
Right.
So it seems like this is just biology.
Well, it's based on our basic instinct of self-preservation. Obviously, being sick or having your life threatened in one way or another is not pleasant. Something that threatens our survival is not a pleasant experience, at least usually. So built into us by nature is this urge to keep the body going, keep on living. And all other instincts are based on that instinct. Obviously, if you're not surviving anymore, you can't sleep or eat, etc., reproduce. So this self-preservation instinct is there for every living thing. And in order to preserve the body, there are certain things that are good for the body and certain things that are not. So nature made it so that we would avoid those things that would threaten our self-preservation. Does it mean it's bad? Because in the end, nature allows us to die. The self-preservation doesn't work in the end. And we do get sick at different times throughout life. We make mistakes. These things still happen. So the basic urge that's built into us by nature is simply to keep the body going. Our experience of the threat to that is unpleasant, and that makes us avoid those things that would stop the body from going. But then we take that and we implant it into virtually everything else in life. We may think something is a threat when it's not, but we'll still treat it as a threat. It's like, a lot of research has shown, if you're at a virtual reality thing, your brain is processing everything as if it was really there.
Well, and the same with dreams, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have threats to our self-preservation in dreams. There could be Godzilla chasing after us in a dream. We're going to run. It's that same type of principle. But the principle is only nature saying, stay here as long as you can. That's it. That's the actual instinct. Our experience of that instinct is fear if something is threatening, and relaxation or pleasure if something is not.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that basic programming from nature, we then spread that idea out to all kinds of things. Because first of all, keep the body going. The ego grows out of the idea that we have separate bodies. So we have separate egos. Our personality grows from the ego, from the collection of experiences that we have throughout life. So it's based on this basic instinct of keeping the body going. It's only natural that it flows into other places where it doesn't really belong. That we start thinking of threats when there are no threats. We start seeing something for example, if we ran across something that was a threat, okay, and we ran away and avoided it, then we come across something else that resembles that threat, we will run away from it and avoid it because it seems to be the same thing or has some resemblance to that thing. This just keeps on going. Something else that resembles the resemblance, and on and on and on and on. It grows. And again, that's a kind of natural impulse too, because nature built into us to pay attention to anything that would be a threat. That's what you really have to be on the alert for. You have to be aware that something is going on that could threaten you. So, run away or be on the alert, whatever it might be. If we're cornered, then we have to defend ourselves and fight. We have to survive. We have to make sure we have food. All these things are built into us by nature, so we'll keep on going. But it grows and grows and grows. It's like I see it a lot in Chloe, my dog, where she becomes afraid of things that are not threatening at all. She hears a loud noise. The garbage truck comes by and empties the recycling bins. And all this banging and stuff goes on. She comes running over to me, afraid. Well, there's nothing to be afraid of there. But she interprets the sound as being something that's really loud to her, since her hearing is much better than mine. And she interprets that loud sound as being somehow threatening to her when it's not. And I think that's a good example of what happens to us, that we take this basic programming of nature to keep on going and turn it into something that it's not. Yes, some things are threatening and some things are not threatening. But the things that are threatening, at least to us now in civilization, aren't all that much. We don't have to worry about a mammoth coming down upon us, and trampling us. We don't have to, go out and hunt for food, although some tribes, I guess, still do in some sections of the world. But for us, what are we afraid of? There's a huge amount of mental illness going around, and anxiety is undoubtedly the foundation of most of it. Fear. Placing fear where it doesn't belong. What they used to call morbid fear.
Mm.
It's not in morbid, it is kind of death dealing. It contracts us more and more and more. It puts us in corners and we're afraid to do this, that, and the other thing because fear is pretty contagious. And it's naturally contagious because of the fact that we need to be on the alert to survive. But we also need to be discriminating.
I was thinking about how not only is it contagious, but it seems to be on some level addictive, because we feed on it pretty regularly and even seek it out to a large degree, I would say.
Yeah. I think in many ways we deal with our fears by a lot of things that, like rides at amusement parks and horror movies and all these different things that we create to deal with fear in a safe way.
Mm-hmm.
Although the rides sometimes aren't safe, but mostly they are. And, I think I did that when I was a kid. I used to really be into horror movies. I think it was a way to face fear.
Really?
That was safe.
Mm-hmm.
It was very safe. I knew I was never afraid of a horror movie. It never, ever scared me, even as a kid. It was something that allowed me to confront this in a way that I would be totally secure and safe. That may not be the whole picture, but I think that's a strong motivation.
Now, you said that you did that when you were a kid, so that indicates that you don't really enjoy watching horror movies now.
I'm not that much into it, no. I don't see the point too much.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe fear is not so much an issue with me anymore, so I don't, my motivation to do that just simply isn't there. Not that I would not watch one, or maybe like it if I watched it.
Mm.
I kind of don't do it. I just don't, it's not there. My interest in that really isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the fact that, we're not discriminating in what we're doing here. We have our egos and personalities, and the formation of the ego goes way, way, way back, I would think, to probably being in the womb. And also our understanding of ego and individuality goes way, way back. We could have had all kinds of experiences that we don't remember that reinforce that ego or reinforce the fear, and base our lives and reactions and perceptions on those things. All of our perceptions are filtered through this programming of nature and our past experiences, whether they're unconscious or conscious. So that what we end up with is a certain individual approach to life that is not necessarily what life consists of. To see reality more clearly, we have to unhook from those contracted and individualized memories and perceptions.
Mm.
And they're based in duality. They're based in choices. The choices are based on the perception of duality. And you can say, well, it's pretty obvious there's day and there's night. I'm not making that up. I'm not imposing day and night on reality. Everyone is experiencing that all over the world and has from prehistoric times, or the time since humans have been around, and all before that one. I guess dinosaurs experienced it too. So what we're looking at then is not so much, what we're looking at is the interpretation of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, of course, there's day and night, and there's black and white, and there's pleasure and pain, and so on. But how do we take them, and what do we do with them?
Well, even in that analogy or that example of day and night, right? We can say, well, here it is. It's real. We can't argue with that. It's nighttime. I see the day. I see the night. However, when you back up off of that and you pull yourself out of where you are in that moment, you recognize that while it might be night for you right now, it's day for someone somewhere else. And so that does start to kind of break open the idea of duality and show us that, while yes, it exists and it's very real, there's also something more. It's contained within something else.
That's right. It's part of a larger picture. And the larger picture is, well, the sun is always shining. You know, our experience of the earth turning gives us the illusion of dark and light, but the sun is always there. And if we think that it's not, because our experience is that it's not, then we're not stepping back far enough out of our contracted awareness to see the full picture and understand what's really going on. And that is the problem. We have that. We're not being discriminating enough to perceive the fact that there's a bigger picture here, that it's not just what we're experiencing at that moment in the waking state and surface level of life, that there's a deeper thing going on while that is going on. So the task becomes to see the bigger picture in the context of the apparent duality. So when we make a choice, it's not so much either or. There are elements within the opposite that are in common with the original thing that we were experiencing. There's elements of light within the nighttime. There's elements of daytime in the nighttime. Where are they? In the sky. There's stars. Just as we have a star that shines on us in the daytime, well, the other stars we can see are shining in the nighttime. There's a very, very common denominator there. But we're not thinking of it like that.
And we're just coming out of this 13th full moon of the year. And so there you have the light the day reflected right there in the night very brightly. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The phases of the moon. Yeah. It's reflected sunlight. So no matter what, there are common elements between apparent opposites. That's what we're not looking at. The bigger picture contains the common elements. So as you see this overlap between opposites, as you delve deeper and deeper into awareness, that overlap becomes greater and greater. The Earth still revolves. The sun still apparently comes up and sets every day, but you're seeing it from a different point of view. It's the point of view that counts. It's not what happens. It's the fact that we give meaning to that point of view. We judge and say the dark isn't as good because we can't see as well, and the light is better because we can see better. And in the past, well, yeah, I guess there were nocturnal animals you had to watch out for in the dark. Mm-hmm. I guess there still are to some extent,
right, in
society. But, you know, we also have street lights and lamps, and we illuminate the night in many ways now, too. Mm-hmm. We've manipulated nature so that we can have it more our way.
Well, I think this also applies to many of the conversations that you hear right now as we end the year and start another. So many people are like, I'm so glad that I can say goodbye to 2020, right? This has been the worst year ever. I'm so glad I could say goodbye to it. And even in that, I have to say, there have been some challenges, but I have really enjoyed a lot of the slowing down and not having so much of that frenetic energy of going from here to there every day on a daily basis to work, and managed to get through all the things I needed to do. So in a lot of ways, there was a lot of positive things. Now, that's not to say that a lot of people haven't had an incredible amount of suffering over this past year because of the pandemic and the just the collective grief and the civil unrest and just a lot of trauma for a lot of individuals. So I don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, that's, again, I'm trying to look at that perspective of, are these things bad? We make judgments about them all the time, and it seems really, really bad. It seems bad.
That's what makes it bad, is the judgment. What makes it good is the judgment. The thing itself is the thing itself. The event is the event. What our experience of the event is what makes that event what it is for us. Okay? So that if it's an unpleasant thing for us, then that thing is unpleasant, and we judge it as being bad. It's possible, as you were saying, some elements of this are not so bad. You're experiencing the same 2020 events as everyone else, but some people are taking psychiatric medication because of it, and other people are seeing the good in it. It's a different experience for different people depending on how we approach it and how comprehensive our awareness is of what's going on, especially within ourselves. Not so much the outside world. The outside world is almost secondary to our lives. It's like the support. It's the scenery. But our actions and the way we take things create our lives. Quite literally. The way we feel about anything is what that event is for us. Pleasant, unpleasant, terrible, wonderful, neutral, whatever it is, mixed. When in reality, all the time, it's always mixed. There's always good things going on and bad things going on according to our judgment. What those things are depends upon the individualized way of looking at it. One person, can be in a horrible situation. Let's say poverty, okay, and suffer terribly because of it, and another finds liberation because of it. And it's the same situation. It's just how we take it, what we do with it, and especially how we judge it. We judge it based on whether it's pleasant or unpleasant for us. And it's pleasant or unpleasant depending on the experiences we've had in our lives. It's all experience. It's all things that we have done, are doing, or will do. Mm. They're not who we are. It's all activity.
I think it's very difficult to hold both of these experiences of, and this is what I seem to be, confronting in my own life today, is to be holding both of those things simultaneously, to be experiencing some incredible, joys and pleasure and freedom and liberation in various aspects of my life, which create a lot of contentment and happiness. And at the very same time, to be experiencing some of the most difficult and devastating levels of grief and, heart-rending emotions simultaneously. And I think this is really difficult to hold because it seems like my rational brain is saying it needs to be one or the other.
Yeah, the rational brain wants to put everything in a box and identify it, and creates the opposites and the duality. If you identify, or more accurately maybe, if your ego and personality identifies with certain things, then it will say, okay, there's this thing and this is more important and the other things are not. That's the either or thing. That's making the duality. That's shutting some things off and letting other things in. When in reality, life is a mixture of both things all the time. The more we see it from a unified point of view, the more we can include all of these things at the same time, at the same level. It's our preferences, it's our avoidance reactions that create, this is more important, this is something I stay away from, this is good, this is bad, and so on. It's not who we are, it's not the way life is. At any given moment, somebody's dying, somebody's being born. Somebody's being very kind, somebody's being horrendous to someone else. At any time, life is constantly a mixture of all these things that we can see as extreme things if we identify with one or another. Our mental energy will just run to the left-hand side and see it as whatever the left-hand side is, and to the right-hand side and see it that way, instead of sitting in the middle and looking at both at the same time. The middle is the balance point, where you're not pulled in one direction or the other, but you're balanced and seeing more of the whole picture, and even seeing how it fits. That if things move this way, of course, it's going to go to the left. And if they move that way, it'll go to the right. And understanding it so much better. When we look only at the surface of things, we're only going to see the surface, and it looks like a whole lot of different things. But as we go deeper and deeper, we begin to see that overlap. We can even see it in our everyday lives with people. There can be people we really don't like that much, but if we sit down and talk to them, maybe we'll find out, oh, they like, this movie, and I like this movie. And there's a commonality there. Maybe not much of one, but there's something that you can see even on the surface that's not opposite. You may not get along with a person or disagree very strongly with their points of view, but their points of view are not them. Our points of view are not us. And if we stop making the differences the thing, then this duality starts falling away more and more and more. If we start approaching duality, because our experience will continue as duality, but if we approach it from the level of unity, there's no longer the duality in the same way. The events continue, just as they always did, but our experience of them changes. If we can see the root of that, if we can see that each individual wave in the ocean is just one ocean moving, and not just all these individual waves that come and go, then we'll experience the waves differently. The waves are still there, but we'll understand them as waves of one ocean. And it's the same thing with this. If we have a glass of water, and a pile of salt, and we see two different things. One's liquid and one's solid, one's clear and one's opaque, and so on. But we pour the salt in the water, mix it together, the salt disappears in the water. It's still there, you can taste it, but it's become one thing, not two separate things in our experience. We can do the same thing. We experience all the multiplicity and duality, but not in that same way. You can still taste the salt, but now it's part of the water, and it's not separate from the water. We have to unite these things that seem to be opposite things into one whole. Then the opposites, as we experience them on the surface, are no longer the same.
Well, how does this work then, though, with so many, atrocities and crimes against humanity and just behavior that is so destructive? How does that work when you're taking this all as one whole?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the destructive behavior exists because of the sense of duality. A war, for example, to go on the greatest level of destruction, is no, you did something we don't like, and we can't sit down and talk about it. We have to get mad about it, and we have to punish you. We have to do something. It's been throughout human history. This is what happens. So that's like the dark way of looking at, we got to do it this way. The light way is, let's sit down at a table and negotiate, which they eventually end up doing. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it does. Sometimes the terms are bad, sometimes they're not. It's all done on that level of duality. Okay? But if we see that dark thing is a piece in the puzzle, we may have talked about that before on last podcast, I don't know, of a jigsaw puzzle, having a picture, and some pieces are dark and some are light. And if you don't have all the pieces together, the whole picture is not complete. It's just not all there. When you place that dark, irregular, ugly piece in the whole puzzle, it falls into place and makes sense. It makes this big picture. And that's what we have to do. We have to see the bigger picture to understand why these smaller events are taking place within the context of the larger whole. And how do you do that? You have to step outside of your ego, as we mentioned last time.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be trapped in this contracted awareness of ego and see things comprehensively. You're only going to go with nature, self-preservation, ego, likes and dislikes. There you go. Likes and dislikes, duality, and all the multiplicity that comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way is to do something that's not mainstream, that people basically don't do in modern day society. Drop all that. And that sounds crazy to people that don't do it. How do you drop all that? That's crazy. As you said, these terrible atrocities are going on. Does that mean you don't care? No, of course not. Of course you care. Does that mean you don't work to change it? No, of course you work to change it. Out here is out here. Things go on as they go on out here. It's simply how we take it and what we do with it internally that determines our experience of it.
I know that as I get older, it's much easier for me to have this view. Maybe it's just because of having to fully surrender to very difficult times and suffering, that allows me to have this perspective. But I do remember being much younger and feeling so like I really needed to fight against these terrible injustices in the world. Now, don't get me wrong. I still have those inclinations, but the drive to quote unquote fight really has become something else, where it's more like holding a space for that transformation because of being in the space of unity. But even when I say that to you, even when I say that out loud, that feels very inadequate to really confront the level of self-destructive behavior or oppressive behavior in the world today. And I know there are many people that that spend their lives devoted to addressing these issues and fighting hard to gain momentum and to overcome racial and class disparities and inequities and poverty and folks who don't even have clean water all over the world, and those are very admirable things. And I don't think that what you're saying is that we don't fight for a better world.
No, we do. We don't have to fight. We just have to act. What we're doing is what appears again to be duality. There's a situation that is unpleasant and we want to make it pleasant. Okay? Out here, this is the way it's going to appear. In everyday life, surface level, waking state life, this is the way it's going to appear, period. If we approach it from the point of view of unity, I think our minds would be clearer, we would know more options and know more things that would be more efficacious to produce the results that we want. I don't think that we should tackle these things on the level of emotion. Our emotion is riled up by this, and that's okay. That's good. That can give us the motivation. But impulsive activity based on it would probably end up in disaster. What we need to do is not be so focused as we throw out all the options that we could possibly use to remedy a situation. Yeah, we should definitely get rid of racism and all of these different poverty and so on. If we're not doing that, I don't think we're growing internally at all. When you grow internally and get this wider perspective, the urge to do these things gets much stronger than it was before. We feel much more of a connection with people, with everybody, with animals, with plants, with everything. We feel that connection with the environment. We know that we don't end at our skin. There's more to us than this. There's more to everyone. There's more to everything than what we're perceiving on the surface. And, science will tell you that any solid object is mostly empty space. We don't experience it as empty space. You say, oh yeah, that table is mostly empty space. Well, how can I rest my hands on it then? It's solid. But it's not. Your hands are mostly empty space too. It's just that our perception on the surface is different from the essence underneath. The essence underneath is this interconnection between all things and finally the unity of all things. So that when we act out of duality, we suffer and we create all these things, poverty and racism and dictatorships or whatever it may be, things that where we impose our ego's standards on other people's ego standards, and that's all it is. We're not acting out of unity when that happens. So I think the remedy for this would be the same thing. Unhook from this way of seeing things. In ancient times, in ancient India, they would have debates. And the debates would be like a debate we'd have here. Someone would have one point of view, another person would have what appears to be an opposite point of view. But the purpose of the debate was not to win the argument. The purpose of the debate was to see the merits of both points of view, to see what there is in common and understand the whole picture from a more comprehensive perspective. In other words, if we approach duality from a both and point of view rather than an either or point of view, we may get more solutions to these problems than we're getting right now. We may see more factors involved in any given situation than we perceive right now.
That seems like a very tall order in our world today.
It is. It would take a lot for that to happen. But I don't know any other way. We can come up with policies based on duality, and that's not that they would not help. They certainly could, but they're not going to solve anything in the end. We're going to come back to the same issues over and over again, as we have throughout all of mankind's recorded history. The same stuff. Over and over. It seems like we never learn the fundamental lesson because we're too caught up in activity, in perception, in memory, and so on. That's what we're caught up in. We're not caught up in ourselves. We're not caught up in the fundamental aspect of life, which is our own simple awareness. We're caught up in the contents of the awareness, not the awareness itself. Who is aware? Who is acting? Who's discriminating? Who's being terrible? Who's being good? And all the value judgments. Who is it? That's what we need to know.
Coming to terms with that and facing one's, own dark, jagged puzzle pieces, along with all the other puzzle pieces that make up ourselves, that is, I feel like that is the work that has to be done for this other, larger work to even have the possibility of happening.
Oh, yeah. You have to be aware of what you've done, where you've come from, to be able to let go of that. I mean, if you don't even know it's there, what are you letting go of? If you're not seeing beyond your ego, then you're not seeing your ego first. What are you going beyond? This limited definition of ourselves is what has to be at first revised and then completely changed. We have to do it one step at a time. Each chapter of our lives we have to take a look at spontaneously. We don't force ourselves to do it. It will just come into our awareness as our awareness grows. It's just happens by itself. As you come to see what you've done, what you've said, who you've been, and what issues have actually stopped you from growing, where we've practiced a lot of self-sabotage for our own lives. And we've all done that. We've short-circuited situations that could have been better just by holding on to old points of view, falling back on default systems of behaving based on past experience. There's a much richer way of living, a much fuller way, but we have to be aware of how we've trapped ourselves first. If we see what we've done that's just messed ourselves up, then why would we continue to do it?
Well, I don't know though, Thom, because that kind of brings me to something I was thinking about when you were talking earlier about the self-preservation and, moving towards things that are pleasant for us and our bodies, and that we're going to stay away from those things that are harmful to us. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, here's another area where the duality sort of is amplified and collapses at the same time, and that's with addiction or addictive behaviors, which are both somehow oddly pleasurable and destructive, self-destructive at the same time.
Right. But that's because they're caught up in that whole ego pleasure principle. It felt good. You escaped from the pain. Or maybe there was no pain. You just escaped and it felt good.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it may be, got you addicted to that substance. Because the way to behave in an ego situation is addictive behavior. You don't have to be addicted to a substance. We're all addicted or attached to all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships, jobs, situations, a piece of furniture, whatever it may be. This is my favorite fill in the blank. There's your attachment.
Right.
That's being totally caught up in ego and attachment. You would never find the way out fully and transform by doing that. We can stop those behaviors only if you step outside of that. I think addiction is the essence of attachment and essence of contracted awareness. So yeah, you would change if you stepped outside of it. Stepping outside of it is a difficult thing to do, especially if you're addicted to a substance and think you need it in order to survive, or you're biologically craving it. I used to smoke cigarettes for 9 years, and it was very difficult for me physically to do that, as I was 22 years old and could not go up 2 flights of stairs without getting out of breath. And that was the alarm bell for me. And I thought, if I'm 22 and I can't make it up 2 flights of stairs, what am I going to be like when I'm 32? Will I make it to 32? So I decided to quit. And I tried everything under the sun, and nothing worked. The only thing that worked was quitting. I decided to quit. And there was real, withdrawal. It's intensely addictive. All your senses are involved. You crave the nicotine. It's like you're in situations where you always smoked for years and years and years, and suddenly you're not doing it anymore. It was not easy. But I just determined I can't do it. I can't smoke. I'm going to kill myself. So I have to do this. And I'll just get through what I thought was I'll get through 2 hours without a cigarette. I had a hard time getting through 1 hour without a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
And I got through 2 hours, and I got through 2 more, and so on. I was hypnotized and told, forget about smoking. And I laughed and said, yeah, right. And I remember the guy said, take your last puff. And I laughed at him because I didn't believe him. But the suggestion lasted for like 2 weeks, and I didn't smoke for 2 weeks. After that, I climbed the walls. Wow. Difficult. But I thought to myself, I lasted 2 weeks. If I can last 2 weeks, I can go 2 more weeks. Mm-hmm. And I did, and 2 more, and 2 more, and 2 more. I didn't try to think, I'm never going to smoke for the rest of my life. That would have been a mountain too big to climb. So, okay, I'll take, 10 steps at a time, and then I'll rest. But I never took another puff. He was right. Never had another one. And that was 45 years ago. So, yeah, it can be done, but you have to step outside of that programming for it to be done. And I'm not going to say that's an easy task by any stretch. Something as, intensely addictive as heroin. And I don't know. I mean, I never did heroin. I don't know what that would be like. I can't say, well, just don't worry about it. Just don't take it and be strong. Yeah, right. The withdrawal is much worse there. But it can be done. I think the only way to treat substance abuse is to treat the whole person. You're not just saying get rid of the drug. It's where is the person coming from? Why is he so addicted? What's going on physically? You have to go through detox and all that kind of stuff, but there's much more to it than that. And the resources to be able to do that, we just don't have in this society right now.
Well, I mean, you bring up such a great point, because I don't think there's any way to treat anything without treating the whole person. Mm-hmm. And we don't do that. We don't look at, I think that's in part why we find ourselves in American culture in the situation that we are today is that we have dehumanized people who are suffering. At the same time, though, just like we're talking about duality and we're holding these two ends of the spectrum a lot throughout the conversation, but here again, we have this dehumanization and separating, the soul of people from their bodies and what's happening with them and the way they're suffering. At the very same time, Thom, that we are so completely identified with our quote unquote identity, which makes us separate from everyone else.
Yeah.
So that we have these two things, this two ends of the spectrum happening simultaneously once again.
Yeah, and they're happening simultaneously because there's just one thing and two parts to the one thing that we're perceiving. We're looking at opposite ends of one pole. And we're not looking at the one pole. We're looking at the opposite ends. It's like the people that identify themselves as their diagnosis. I'm an addict. I'm this, that, and the other. I'm a patient of this, whatever it may be. What's wrong with me is what I identify with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how's that going to work in the end? How are we going to see ourselves as being more than what we appear to be if we hold on to a diagnosis as a definition of who we are? That's about as limiting as you could possibly imagine, as well as being really, really not good, not conducive to growth, not something that will get us somewhere beyond what we're at if we're holding on to our diagnosis.
Yeah, so, I think this being so identified with whatever it happens to be, I know exactly what you're talking about with diagnosis. That seemed to be, in American culture, we just seem to latch on to whatever it is, that this is what makes me me. And it's generally the way that I have had to suffer.
Yeah, right. We like labels. We like to identify it, which I think also comes from the self-preservation thing, to identify what's a threat and what isn't. We just, again, put it in places it doesn't belong. I think like racism, putting our rational minds in places where it doesn't belong. Okay, this person's, ethnic origin is different from mine. Their customs and language are different. Therefore, put a value judgment on it. Why can't we have both existing at the same time? Because they do. If a person's skin color, well, who cares? Everyone has different skin colors, within a white spectrum. How are you going to measure that? It's just so arbitrary and ridiculous. But this is what, categorization does. This is what labeling does. It gets more and more and more picky and more ridiculous. That's this, contagion thing that happens in our minds. Once we identify with a certain thing, it just keeps on going by itself based on that self-preservation principle. Always identifying, always labeling. I had a bad experience, with someone from, England. Therefore, all British people are terrible, and what a crazy conclusion to come to, there were 10 or 15 of them. Well, I think probably more than 10 or 15 people that live in Britain, but we don't even think of that. We don't even bother with it. That rational thing goes out the window based on putting someone in a category and labeling them a certain way without ever trying to find out any evidence that that label is true. This tendency that we have keeps us more and more on the surface, more and more entrenched in duality, multiplicity, and as a result, more and more entrenched in suffering and problems.
Mm-hmm.
I really think the solution is stepping outside of that boundary and seeing it not from an ego point of view, but seeing it from a much more comprehensive point of view. I'm not sitting at one end of the seesaw and the other person sitting at the other end. I'm sitting in the middle and seeing both things at the same time.
But how does that work when we are doing our own personal internal work and we may have to uncover such difficult things that we've suppressed, let's say. We have to confront them and we have to discover them, and we may then we must identify them for ourselves. How do we identify them for ourselves without becoming identified with them?
Well, that is the process of letting go of ego. When you're able to, and this is not something that happens overnight or something that can happen easily. It happens over a period of time if you are consistent with a practice that lets you let go of ego, which would be meditation for me. Any practice that does that would be meditation. So using that as a definition, if you meditate consistently over a period of time, more and more awareness grows within you. You begin to see these aspects of yourself. The things you've avoided, what will happen? Well, you're going to avoid it at first. When you become aware of it, you're going to have the same reaction. It's not going to be a miraculous change. But as you continue to become more and more aware of it, you see more and more facets of it. You begin to realize where you're coming from more and more and more and more. And as a result, it gets easier to let go of those things. At first, it's things that are fairly easy to let go of. But as you continue in the practice, these things are more entrenched in your life and in your definition of yourself as an ego and personality. They're less and less easy to let go, which means they'll persist longer. But again, if you keep practicing, the same thing will happen to these things. The things that you absolutely would run away from, you don't anymore. It's easier to let go. You can't let go of it while you identify with it. Okay? It's stepping outside of that identification that allows you to let go of it slowly over a period of time. Till finally you find yourself free of a lot of things you didn't think you even had in the first place in some cases. And you realize also how you acted in the past and how those things were coming from a very limited point of view once your point of view is expanded enough to be able to include those things from another perspective. So how do you do it? Practice. Consistently. You can't make that happen. Say, oh, I've got to get rid of this thing. Well, that's your ego trying to get rid of something in your ego. That's not going to work. You have to allow it to go. And you can't allow it to go as long as you hold on to it. So non-attachment has to be practiced to those things. Non-attachment essentially to your own ego and personality is what eventually results. Doesn't mean you don't have them. Doesn't mean you don't still live and do your thing. It means you're seeing them from another perspective. You're realizing your definition of yourself was unbelievably inadequate, and who you actually are includes those things, but are not those things. You still do, you still act, you still, go for the things you want to go for. If you want to fight injustice, you do that. You have more of a motivation to do that, as a matter of fact. And you see the absurdity of all the conflicts. When you're involved in the conflict, you certainly can't see that. You're totally embedded in it. But when, again, step outside, it's like, I don't know if I said this last time, by being at the level of a connect the dots puzzle. You're on the level of the line and you move ahead and suddenly you hit a dot and move to the left, move diagonally and so on. You're going, what the heck's going on here? Life is a whole series of crazy things happening. You need to step away from the level of the line to see the picture that you're forming. That picture doesn't form without hitting that dot and going to the left and so on. But you don't know that if you're on the level of the line, moving with the line, and can only see that. So it's that stepping away, stepping outside, getting a bigger, more comprehensive understanding of what's going on that creates the ability to let go and lessens conflict between people and within yourself, resolves the problems spontaneously. Doesn't mean you don't work on them if they come up. You do that, but they don't come up by really pushing it. It's like psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, what would he do? Free association. Just ramble on, don't think about anything, and the psychoanalyst will guide you when something comes up that seems significant. You were relaxed. You laid on a couch. It wasn't conscious manipulation of things that he was after. He was after what's surfacing from the unconscious that you weren't aware of. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's the same kind of principle of allow these things to come up. And when you recognize them, it means you're ready to recognize them and work on them. Okay? You may get nowhere at first. It may be years. It may be months. It may be right away. There's no way of knowing. but it won't happen at all if you don't do it. If you don't step outside to see the whole connect the dots picture, you're going to be slamming your head against each big dot and ricocheting off of it for the rest of your life and not seeing the picture at all.
Well, thank you so much, Thom, for this very rich and enlightening conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm just looking forward to picking up where we left off the next time.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
You have been listening to Interspace with Angelina Avedano. My heartfelt gratitude and appreciation goes to my husband, David Needs, Senior Production Engineer. If you would like to learn more about me or my work, look for me on Facebook and Instagram, Dr. A. Avedano with Cicada Personal Metamorphosis. That's Cicada with a Y, C-Y-C-A-D-A. Or you can email me at dr.aavedano@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This is Angelina reminding you that we're all connected.